So we shared you into, well, 3 things. This side here, and this is the tempo. We will do some music together. This is the tempo, right? So these people here, from this side, you use your 2 hands and you tap on your lap like this. Can you try it out? Cool. These people here, you clap. So this is the tempo. Let's try just one time. Wait, 1 each. 2 here, 1 here. 2 here, go. 1 clap. Again, let's try one more. 2. We're getting very good at it. Okay. So, let's do that together with a little sound. You ready? Let's try together. No sound! I will show you the sound with low tech. Now let's add a little bit more of, while I show the sound, we will add a little bit more complexity, and everyone who either spoke or were in the panel today, instead of clapping, you will snap. Okay? So, just for you to remember the tempo. Start. Thank you. It's quite nice, isn't it? It's silly, but it's quite nice. And this is a song for the audience. So this song, this particular song, it was non-random. It called, probably you know, but it called We Will Rock You. It's a song from, I think it was a drummer of Queen called Brian May, from 77. And it became one of the greatest songs of all times. And the song, it was inverting it was inverting the condition. It was not about the great, unique musician. It was not Beethoven. It was not the composer. It was about giving the power to the audience. It was about that powerful thing that can only happen when everyone collaborates. And this song makes you, dear audience, rock singer for a concert. You just made a legit rock concert because this music was meant for it. Congratulations. But more than this is what open source is about. When you use something that is open source, that's collaborative, it gives you the power and gives you the possibility to be your own rock star. Now, let's understand a few things here, right? That is beautiful. You saw, it's powerful, it's beautiful. So I need a volunteer. And I have a volunteer. Would like to be my volunteer? You can stay there, it's okay. So do you remember the tempo, right? The tempo is clap, clap. And I can come back here and just follow the tempo. Now let's do the song, but you're just one. And you're just snapping, right? Well, with the tempo, when you see the clap, you snap, right? Okay. Let's go.
Nobody listens.
Exactly. This is what happened, and this is a kind of a demonstration in a big, good picture what happened when this power of collaboration is not military. For that we call the tragedy of the commons. It's a very clear case in open source. Because this poor person, and now it's so not loud. And indeed, if you go to KubeCon, for example, you see 10,000 people seated there, and when you ask the question, who of you consume open source? The 10,000 will surely raise their hands. Who here contributes to open source?
No.
And that is what you see. This poor volunteer doing the best. But what happened if that poor volunteer, how long can you stay snapping for?
Not for a long time.
Exactly. That there's also a limit in open source, burnout, and that's serious and has been happening for a long, long time. So the problem is a serious thing in open source. And what happened when that thing, right, when you just cannot clap anymore, cannot snap, that happened. And that's also a classic comic from Ex-Cassidy, if you don't know, it's great, it's funny. And this is what happened to the industry and why you should care about it. When when they stop snapping, the whole industry will fall down. And not just the open source, the whole industry. And this is why it irritates me when I come to a conference like this that is really business focused. And I have just, facing the microphone, and I have just a few people when you ask, why is open source and this so important and Kubernetes so important? It is for the community. It is because of the power of the community. Because this is sustaining the whole industry. And this is a quite important message that I hope you get a little bit more clear here. And one example, just for you to know, if you want to search for it, if you don't want to trust a comic or a little drawing, is the Heartbleed. Have you heard about the scandal of Heartbleed in 2014? It was a security issue that found in an open SSL encryption library that most of the softwares use, and that made all the passwords, all the credit cards, and all the important personal information being leaked because one single library had a security breach, make the whole industry fall. So there's a real examples for that. But we have other very serious issues in open source. Let's go back to the clapping exercise, right, that we're seeing. Let's pretend that for this one of the greatest songs that ever existed, we would have just beat our hands and not clap because we do not like the clapping. Or we decide that the clapping people, they are in a birthday party. They cannot be here in this space because they have to go to their birthday party. And you just have the beating on the leg. What does it mean?
You have no one important part of the song.
Exactly. That clapping that should be in that space and should be able to have created one of the greatest songs are not there. You will not have, don't illusion yourself, you will not have a greatest song. We need diversity. And if you think I'm just speaking like a Paloma, you're a diversity advocate, but well, you're just saying. Am I saying? Research is saying that in the open source space, less than 3%, 5 is a very, it's a good number, less than 3% are not white male from the north sphere of the planet. That's serious. That means that all the other bodies that are not in the space are not making decisions that are driving the industry forward. They're not clapping, there's not snapping, there's a lot of all the parts of the body that are not being represented there. And for you to understand how bad it is in the industry, and I know some of you will feel it with me very hardly, we have about 25% of women in tech. And we feel it, right? We feel it quite harsh, like we miss it. But in open source, it's less than 3%. It's super serious. So when we think about open source, and this is why I'm here today, is to try to open a little bit of our minds to understand open source for something that is way bigger than code. And there are other parts that we're not thinking about it, but we will deeply affect the result of it. And we won't be able to make one of the greatest songs. And why does it happen? Do you have any kind of hints about why do we have this sad statistics? Anyone would a guess? You can, but I can tell you too. One of the things for me is one of my fights nowadays, stop taking that idea of the male genius, male technical genius of the space, because that's what we value today. It's just that guy that can solve the issue, and will create one line of code that probably no one will understand anyway, but it doesn't matter. He's the genius that will save the world, and that's super serious, because in open source, it is so much bigger than that, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So understanding open source from this big picture is one of the series that we need to tackle. The second one, it is a basic labor issue. Open source is great, but it's mostly from people's free time. And who has free time? And if you are, if you live in some countries, not in Germany, I'm very happy to live here now, but that was not the case in Latin America. Most people has 2 or 3 jobs. That means that people in Latin America will not become contributors because they do not have time, or they will spend 3 hours a day in a public transport. That's real number. You cannot find. So we have to be intentional in finding the space and possibility for those bodies to be present by making intentional how they can collaborate and be part of that space. So it is a labor issue. Also for a lot of people who take care. Even in Germany, in average, men has at least 2 hours more than women for leisure a day. 2 hours more a day. There is a lot. So how can you expect me to be there collaborating free when I have an average also in Germany? I earn 18% less and I have 2 hours less of time. Do you see how much that is very systemic and why we should be paying attention? Yeah, we need to be intentional. And when I say it is an ecosystem, and I can talk about open source and issues for hours, is understanding that why it is so much bigger than code. Back to the clapping examples. We needed a clap, and we needed the punch, and we needed a snap. They are doing different things. Open source is the same. You think it's about the code, but it's a lot to do with the community and with the advocacy. The value of open source, it is in the community. It lies on this community. If no one uses it, so if you're not advocating for it, no one will even know it exists. If you're not creating good documentation, no one can use it or onboarding. So there's so much value there that we need to pay attention and start valuing. And there's a lot of other things that compose the open source scenario. It is about license, because if we can say about free and open software, open source today, it is a legal matter of having the right upon the creation of thing to share. And there's ways we can do that. One of them is having OSPOs or someone that is highly specialized, and that's me, that helps your company to match the business needs with the needs of the communities. That's fundamental, because sometimes we kind of get lost in the words of how to translate those both needs. And everyone wants to have champagne and have a good life. So open source is not about being free. Indeed, that's a misconception. Open source is about the freedom of user to see, modify, and redistribute the code. It's not free. Mostly someone is paying the bill, and it's mostly a big bill. So it is about freedom and understanding the ecosystem. Whew. That was a lot, a bit heavy, huh? Sorry, I promised it would be light. This is a bunch, just a little recap of what I just spoke, because I'm about to end. We saw a little bit about how powerful is the collaboration, why that if we don't have that, to have that break and we create a tragedy of the commons that is very common. We talk about why we need to talk about the lack of diversity and what we need to do to mitigate that, and why open source, it's not about code but a whole ecosystem. For me, this is my personal definition of open source, and I will read it out loud because it took me a while to get to it and I really love it. Open source is a real possibility of equity, of de-hierarchization, of the potential of collective organization, of flowing and belonging in a truly global world. Open source is powerful, but it depends to us if we will still replicate the same exploitations idea behind of it, or if we will use that power to change the world a little bit. I did wrote some beautiful things, but it's basically that. So every time you think open source is free and I will exploit it, think about this clapping game. And think about how sad it is to see our little volunteers snapping and you cannot even listen. I really thank you everyone for listening to me. My name is Paloma. If you want to hear more, you can just schedule a one-on-one time with me. I would love to talk to you about that.
Brilliant, Paloma. Thank you very much. That's really good. Opened my eyes to some things, the diversity point, and you know, if you haven't got time to contribute, you won't contribute. There is a question from our group here. To some extent you've answered it, but maybe just elaborate. In what ways do you think the collaborative model of open source software fosters knowledge sharing and a more interconnected tech community?
I have one example that is, for me, the beauty and the power of the openness. It is a case, I will forget her name now, but if you search like, hey internet, is a case of a woman that was able to run away from Taliban using a software called Khan Academy. Do you know the software? Yeah. It is an educational software. And it is open source and it's made by volunteers. And that took her to study, I think in Stanford. It is some university in US, and she helping design the aerospatial physics now. Running away from Taliban, a place where she could not even learn how to read, just because of the internet and the power of sharing.